Have you ever wondered what runs through a person's mind when they stand alone at the edge of everything they know, with nothing but pain and the vast empty sky above them? What happens to human strength when all other options disappear? This is not a story about giving up. This is a story about a young Apache girl named Ahiga who learned that sometimes the greatest act of courage is not becoming a hero in the eyes of others, but refusing to become a victim in your own story. What she discovered alone in that canyon would change not just her life, but everyone who heard what she did and why. Ahiga was 17 years old when her life changed in 3 seconds. The reservation where she grew up was not a place of poverty or despair like people often imagined when they heard the word Apache. It was home. It had mountains that turned purple at sunset, roads made of red earth that stretched toward places that existed only in stories, and people who loved each other fiercely because they understood that family was everything when the world had already taken so much from you. Her father, James, fixed cars in a garage that served the whole community. Her 2 younger brothers were loud and annoying in the way that only little brothers knew how to be. The day it happened was a Friday in September. Ahiga had taken her father's old pickup truck to drive to a gathering place high up in the canyon where she and some friends planned to spend the afternoon. The canyon was sacred to the Apache people. Stories lived in those rock walls. The ancestors had walked those paths. For Ahiga, it was a place where she felt closest to understanding who she was supposed to be. She was 17 and confused, as all 17-year-olds are, but she knew that the canyon held answers if she sat quietly enough to listen. She had driven this road 100 times before. Her father had taught her every curve and every stone to watch for. But on this particular Friday, a family of deer crossed the road without warning, just like that. No announcement, no reason, just a mother deer and 2 babies, moving from one side of the dust to the other. Ahiga did what everyone would do. She swerved. She tried not to hit them. The truck, which was older than she was, responded by doing something older trucks do when they become frightened. It left the road entirely. The fall took 4 seconds. She counted them later when she was able to think about counting again. The truck rolled twice, 3 times maybe. She never was completely sure. Glass broke and metal screamed, and her right leg broke in a way that left the bone showing white through the torn skin like a terrible secret suddenly revealed. The truck came to rest on its side, half buried in a creek bed that was usually dry, but had remembered water that week because of unexpected rains. When Ahiga tried to move, the pain was a living thing. It had color. It had weight. It had a voice that screamed inside her head with an intensity that made thinking feel impossible. Her leg was wrong. Worse than wrong. The bone was visible. The bleeding was significant. She tried her phone, but service lived higher up, closer to civilization. She tried the truck's radio, but the battery had died or disconnected or simply decided to give up, which seemed reasonable given the circumstances. She was alone. She was injured. She was in a canyon where even the echoes of her voice seemed reluctant to bounce back to her. What she did next, she would later struggle to explain. Some people called it survival instinct. Some people called it Apache strength. Some people called it stubbornness. Ahiga never called it anything, because she understood that the names other people gave to your actions often said more about them than about you. She used a torn piece of cloth from her shirt to apply pressure to the bleeding. She set the bone back as straight as she could bear to do it, using a piece of branch and more pieces of her shirt as a makeshift splint. The pain of doing this was worse than the pain of having the injury, which seemed wrong but felt right when she understood it as the difference between pain that damages you and pain that heals you. Then she waited. She waited for 6 hours. She waited through the afternoon while the sun moved slowly across the sky and the temperature began to drop. She waited as the canyon filled with shadow and then with darkness. She waited while her leg throbbed and her heart learned a new rhythm that matched her breathing, which had become shallow and careful. When her friends never found her at the gathering place, they knew something was wrong. People who care about you know these things. Her mother, Clara, started calling after 3 hours of silence. After 4 hours, her father, James, started driving. By the time the sun had almost completely left the sky, people were organizing. They knew her. They knew the roads. They knew the canyon. What they did not know was where to look in a place so large that it could swallow a whole life without leaving a trace. But Ahiga's mother had instinct that ran deeper than blood. Clara had not been born Apache, but she had lived Apache long enough to understand how the land spoke. She remembered where her daughter loved to go. She remembered that Ahiga had taken the truck that morning. And as darkness fell, she knew the way a mother sometimes knows things that have not yet happened, but that the universe whispers to her anyway. It took 2 hours to find the truck. It took another hour to reach Ahiga in the canyon's depths, and another 30 minutes to carefully lift her from the wreckage and carry her up and out toward the light. Throughout all of this, Ahiga did not cry. She did not scream. She did not curse the deer or the truck or the road or the bad luck that had crossed her path like an unwanted animal. When the paramedics came, they said she was in shock. When the doctors examined her at the hospital, they said she was lucky. Lucky to be alive. Lucky that the bone had been set correctly. Lucky that she had not bled out in the darkness. Lucky that her mother had known where to find her. But Ahiga understood something that they did not. She was not lucky. Luck was random. What she had discovered in those hours alone in the canyon was not luck. It was something much more complex and much more real. The first surgery took 4 hours. The surgeons rebuilt her leg using titanium rods and screws, and something that looked like wire when she asked to see the x-rays later. They told her she should feel grateful. She should feel blessed. She should feel whatever emotion seemed appropriate for someone who had fallen off a mountain and lived to tell about it. But Ahiga's voice had changed in the canyon. It had developed a quiet quality that made people listen more carefully when she spoke, though she rarely spoke at all. Recovery was a different kind of pain. It was the pain of learning to walk when your body had decided to betray you. It was the pain of physical therapy sessions where professionals in white coats pushed her to move her leg in ways that made her want to scream. It was the pain of watching her younger brothers play outside through a window while she sat immobilized in a chair, her leg elevated on pillows that never stayed fluffy enough to be comfortable. But what surprised the people around her was not her recovery. What surprised them was her attitude toward it. She did not rage against her circumstances. She did not feel sorry for herself, though everyone around her seemed prepared to feel sorry for her in a way that she found exhausting. She simply showed up to physical therapy and did the work. She pushed herself to the limit of her pain every single day, not because anyone told her to, but because she understood something that the canyon had taught her. Pain was a language. Suffering was a choice. She had suffered in the canyon because survival required it. But now that survival was no longer in question, she had a choice to make. She could stay in the canyon, metaphorically speaking. She could let the injury define her. She could become a story about what happened to her rather than a story about who she would choose to become. Or she could do something that seemed insane to everyone watching her. She could choose to move forward. In the 3rd week after surgery, when she was still supposed to be resting and healing in a careful, measured way, she asked her father to take her back to the canyon. He said no. Her mother said no. The doctors said absolutely not. But Ahiga had learned something about the word no. It was not a destination. It was just a place where you had to decide whether to stop or to find another way. She waited until her mother was at work and her father was at the garage. She waited until her brothers were at school and the house was empty, except for her and the afternoon light. Then, moving slowly and painfully, she crutched her way out to the driveway. Her father had a newer truck now, but he kept the old one. He had repaired it after the accident, replacing the broken glass and bent metal, fixing it back into something that could run. The truck that had tried to kill her now sat waiting, ready for a second chance. She drove with her left foot. It was a technique that required a kind of desperation. But desperation was something she understood now. The road to the canyon stretched ahead of her the way roads always do, indifferent to the significance of anyone's journey. When she reached the spot where the truck had left the road, she stopped. She looked at the place where the trees were bent and broken, where the dust still showed the marks of wheels that had gone the wrong direction. Not because she was scared, but because breathing is what you do when you are about to do something that requires all of your courage and all of your strength. Then she got out of the truck. Moving on crutches down the slope where she had fallen was not wise. It was not what the doctors would have recommended. It was the kind of thing that physical therapists have nightmares about. But Ahiga had learned in the canyon that wisdom and living were sometimes different things. Wisdom told you not to do dangerous things. Living sometimes required that you do them anyway. The descent took 30 minutes. By the time she reached the creek bed where the truck had come to rest after rolling 3 times, her hands were shaking and her leg was screaming. But she had not fallen. She had not hurt herself. She had simply moved toward something that frightened her. And in moving toward it, she had learned that the thing that frightened you lost most of its power when you looked it directly in the face. She stood in the creek bed and looked at the rocks, the water, the place where she had lain alone and bleeding, and decided that dying was not an option she was willing to choose. She understood, standing there in the afternoon light, that the canyon had not changed. The rocks were still rocks. The water was still water. But she had changed. She had walked into darkness and found a light inside herself that had nothing to do with fear and nothing to do with pain. Then she turned around and climbed back up. The climb back was harder than the descent, but harder is not the same as impossible. She used the crutches in her arms and her will, which had become surprisingly strong. When she reached her truck, her father was standing next to it. He must have gotten a call from someone who had seen her on the road. He was pale and angry in the way that fathers get when their children do things that remind them how little control they actually have. He did not say anything. She did not say anything. He simply helped her into the truck, and they drove home in silence. That night, her parents sat down with her in the kitchen. Her mother made tea, the way she always did when there were difficult things to discuss. Her father looked at her with eyes that had aged years in the last few weeks. "Why did you go back?" he asked. Not angrily, just wanting to understand. Ahiga took a moment to find the words. "Because," she said, speaking the way she spoke now, slowly and carefully, as if each word had to be earned. "I needed to remember that the canyon was just a place. The accident was just something that happened. But I am still me, and I get to choose what that means." Her mother reached across the table and took her hand. Her father nodded, understanding in that moment what had shifted inside his daughter in the darkness of that canyon. She was not the same girl who had driven away from their home on that Friday in September, but she was stronger. Not in her muscles, not yet, but in something deeper, in the part of her that knew the difference between surviving and living. The physical therapy took 6 months. By the end of it, Ahiga could walk without crutches, though she would always have a slight limp that the doctors said might improve with time and exercise. She returned to school in January, to the looks and the questions and the careful kindness of people who did not know what to say to someone who had died and been born again in the same month. Her classmates asked her questions. Was it scary? Did you think you were going to die? What was it like being alone in the dark? She answered some of these questions. She did not answer others. She had learned that sometimes the stories people want to hear are not the stories you need to tell. What surprised everyone was what she did with the experience. She did not become a motivational speaker. She did not go on television. She did not write a book. What she did was quieter and, in its own way, more profound. She volunteered at the hospital. She visited other patients who were recovering from accidents and injuries. She sat with them in their pain and did not tell them everything would be fine. She told them something more real and more helpful. "You are going to get through this," she would say. "Not because everything is going to be easy, but because you are going to realize that you are stronger than you thought you were. And once you know that about yourself, it changes everything." She worked at the community center, helping young Apache children learn about their history and their strength. She encouraged them to go into the canyon, not to conquer it, but to listen to what it had to teach them. She taught them that their heritage was not something that happened to people 100 years ago. It was alive in them. It was alive in their choices every day. When she was 18, they asked her to speak at the high school graduation. She stood at the podium in front of 500 people and their families. She did not talk about the accident. She did not talk about pain, or fear, or the canyon. She talked about something much simpler. "Every single one of you," she said, "is going to face something that you believe you cannot survive. It might be small, it might be large, but you will face it. And when you do, you need to remember that the thing you cannot survive is only as powerful as you believe it to be. You get to choose what happens next. You get to decide whether the accident defines you or whether you define yourself. Make that choice consciously. Make it daily. Make it with the knowledge that you are capable of so much more than you know." Her voice was not loud, but in the quiet way she spoke, every person in that auditorium heard her. They heard her not because she was the loudest voice in the room, but because she was speaking something that they already knew in their hearts and simply needed someone else to say out loud first. Years later, when people asked her about the accident, about that day in the canyon, about what it felt like to be 17 and broken and alone, She would sometimes tell them about the pain. She would sometimes describe the fear. But what she always came back to was this: the canyon did not heal me. The doctors did not heal me. My family did not heal me. I healed myself. The canyon just taught me that I could. She understood that the scars on her leg were not something to hide. They were something to honor. They were proof of a story that belonged to her. Not to her parents, not to the doctors, not to the people who wanted to see her as a victim. The scars belonged to Ahiga. They told her story. And her story was not about an injured Apache girl in a canyon calling out for someone to end her suffering. It was about a strong woman who had learned that the only one who could end her suffering was herself. And once she learned that she could also choose to end anything else that did not serve her life. This is the story that lives in the canyon now, not in the rocks or the water, but in the memory of a young woman who taught everyone around her that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the willingness to face the fear, sit with it, understand it, and then move forward anyway. Ahiga's story became a story about all of us because all of us are injured in some way. All of us are afraid in some way. And all of us have the same choice that Ahiga had when she lay in the darkness. We can end it, not in the way people might have thought she meant, but in the way she discovered in that canyon. We can end the old story we have been telling about ourselves. We can end the belief that we are victims. We can end the fear. And we can begin something new.